You're not chasing profits. You never were. And deep down, if you sit with that for just a moment, you already know it's true. Because if this were purely about money, you would have stopped a long time ago. After the first blown account, after the sleepless nights, after the trades that made no logical sense but you took anyway, after the wins that felt hollow and the losses that felt personal. If this were just about profit, the spreadsheet would have told you the truth months ago, and you would have listened. But you didn't. And here's what nobody in the trading world wants to say out loud. Most traders aren't addicted to money, they're addicted to a feeling. A very specific, very powerful, almost indescribable feeling that happens somewhere between entering a trade and watching it move in your direction. A feeling that has nothing to do with your account balance, a feeling that lives in your nervous system, your identity, your sense of self-worth. And once you've felt it, once it's really gotten into you, almost nothing else in ordinary life can compete with it. That is what you're chasing. And today, we're going to break it down completely. Not to make you feel bad, not to pathologize you, but because understanding this, truly understanding it, might be the single most important step you've ever taken toward actually becoming the trader you keep telling yourself you want to be. So let's start from the beginning. Point 1, the market doesn't give you money, it gives you identity. Think about the first time you had a really good trade. Not just profitable, I mean the kind of trade where everything clicked, where you read the market correctly, you entered with precision, and you watched price do exactly what you anticipated. Do you remember how that felt? It wasn't just satisfaction. It wasn't just, oh good, I made some money. It was something deeper, something that whispered, I figured it out, I'm smart enough, I can do this. I see what others don't see. That feeling, that quiet, powerful surge of competence and clarity, is not a financial experience. It's an identity experience. And this is where trading psychology gets really interesting, because researchers who study high-risk decision-making have consistently found that people who gravitate toward environments like financial markets are often not primarily motivated by financial gain. They're motivated by what financial gain represents to them symbolically. For some people, a winning trade is proof that they are intelligent. For others, it's proof that they're in control. For others, it's proof that they have finally escaped mediocrity, escaped their past, escaped the version of themselves they've been trying to leave behind for years. The market becomes a mirror. And when the market validates you, when it moves in your direction, what you're experiencing is not just profit. You're experiencing a momentary confirmation of the identity you desperately want to be true. Now, here's where it gets complicated, because that same mirror, when the market moves against you, doesn't just cost you money, it threatens that identity. A losing trade doesn't feel like a neutral data point. It feels like evidence. Evidence that maybe you weren't as smart as you thought. Maybe you don't have what it takes. Maybe you were fooling yourself. And so the chase begins, not to recover money, to recover the feeling, to get that mirror to reflect something good again. This is why traders revenge trade, not because they've lost their minds, but because they're trying to reclaim a sense of self that a losing trade temporarily stole from them. This is why traders over-leverage after a drawdown, not because the math makes sense, because the emotional math, the internal math, demands a fast restoration of identity. The market didn't just take money. The market took a piece of who you believe you are, and you want it back. Psychologists call this ego threat response. It's a deeply human reaction that shows up everywhere. But in trading, it's almost weaponized, because in no other environment can you respond to an ego threat so quickly, so easily, and with so much at stake. You don't have to wait. You just click. You take another trade. You go again. And in that moment of action, the anxiety temporarily dissolves because action feels like agency, and agency feels like identity. But this is the trap, because identity built on market outcomes is identity that is permanently at the mercy of something you cannot control. And the traders who break free from this cycle, who actually reach consistency, are almost always the ones who found a way to separate their sense of self from the outcome of any individual trade. They stopped needing the market to validate them. And that shift, subtle as it sounds, changes everything about how you trade. Point 2. The dopamine loop nobody taught you about. Let's talk about your brain for a minute. Specifically, let's talk about dopamine, because this one neurochemical explains more about trading behavior than any strategy, any indicator, any risk management framework ever written. Here's what most people get wrong about dopamine. They think it's the pleasure chemical. They think dopamine is what you feel when something good happens. But that's not quite right. Dopamine is actually the anticipation chemical. It's the chemical of wanting, not having. It spikes hardest not when you receive a reward, but in the moments just before, when reward feels possible. Let me say that again because it matters enormously. Dopamine peaks in the gap between action and outcome, in the uncertainty, in the waiting, in the not yet knowing. And what does that sound like to you? It sounds exactly like holding an open trade. The moment you click that buy button, the moment you enter the market, your brain immediately enters a state of heightened dopaminergic arousal. The outcome is uncertain, reward is possible, and your brain is flooding with the neurochemical equivalent of electric anticipation. This is why trading feels so alive. This is why no matter how many times you've been burned, there is always that electric feeling right after you enter a position, that aliveness, that sharpness, that feeling of being fully present, fully awake, in a way that almost nothing else in daily life provides. And here's the insidious part. This feeling doesn't require the trade to be profitable. It just requires the trade to be open. Think about what that means. Your brain is rewarding you chemically, physiologically, for the act of being in the market, not for being right, not for making money, simply for being in the game, simply for the uncertainty, simply for the possibility. Which means every time you open a trade, even a reckless one, even one you know in the back of your mind you shouldn't take, your brain experiences a reward signal, a little chemical hit of aliveness. And over time, with enough repetition, that pattern gets encoded. The brain learns that trading equals aliveness, that the market equals feeling. And so in those quiet, flat, unremarkable moments of daily life, when you're sitting there, nothing happening, the market's slow, no setups present, the brain sends a signal, a pull, a subtle, uncomfortable restlessness. Go find a trade. Not because there's a setup, not because the conditions are right, because the brain wants that feeling back, because stillness to a dopamine-conditioned trader has started to feel like suffering. And so you zoom into the 5-minute chart, you find something that almost looks like a pattern, you tell yourself a story about why this trade makes sense, and you enter. Not to make money, to feel something. This is the dopamine loop, and it is at the core of almost every form of overtrading, revenge trading, and impulsive execution that traders experience. But knowing about it, genuinely understanding the mechanism, gives you something most traders never have. It gives you a moment of space between the impulse and the action. A moment where you can ask, am I entering this trade because my plan says so, or am I entering because my brain is craving stimulation? That question, asked honestly and consistently, is one of the most powerful trading tools that has ever existed, and it costs nothing. Point 3. The feeling you're actually chasing has a name. We've talked about identity. We've talked about dopamine. Now let's get even more specific, because there's a particular emotional state that consistently drives trading behavior far more than any technical analysis, and most traders have never consciously identified it. Psychologists who study peak performance, athletes, surgeons, pilots, special forces operators, describe a state known as flow. You've probably heard of it. That state of complete absorption where time disappears, self-consciousness disappears, doubt disappears, and your actions feel fluid, effortless, and precisely calibrated. Flow is often described as one of the most positive emotional experiences a human being can have, and it is extraordinarily difficult to access in ordinary life. But here's what's fascinating. Trading, particularly active, discretionary trading, is one of the few civilian activities that consistently and reliably produces flow-like states. The combination of high stakes, rapid feedback, skill demands, and emotional intensity creates precisely the psychological conditions that make flow possible. And once a trader has experienced that state, that feeling of being in the zone, reading the market perfectly, executing cleanly, and watching price do exactly what you anticipated, it becomes the reference point for everything. Ordinary life starts to feel slow. Office meetings feel unbearably dull. Conversations feel flat. Routine tasks feel almost insulting. Because somewhere in the background, the nervous system is measuring everything against that feeling it had in the market, that aliveness, that sharpness, that sense of being fully engaged with something real and consequential. And so the trader keeps returning, not for profit, for flow. This is why some of the most psychologically destructive patterns in trading happen to genuinely intelligent, emotionally sensitive people. Because the more attuned you are, the more you feel things deeply, the more intensely you experience that flow state when it happens, the more powerfully you're drawn back to it, and the more ordinary life suffers by comparison. Now, what I want you to notice is that flow is not inherently destructive. Flow in trading, when it emerges naturally from proper preparation and disciplined process, is actually a sign that you're operating at your best. It's the state you want to be in. The problem is when traders try to force it, when they manufacture urgency to create the conditions for flow, when they over-leverage to raise the emotional stakes because higher stakes feel more alive, when they trade outside their plan because the plan feels too mechanical, too slow, and mechanical execution doesn't produce the feeling they're looking for. This is where the greatest self-deception in trading happens. The trader tells himself he's taking this trade because of the setup, but what he's really doing is engineering an emotional experience. He's constructing the conditions that make him feel most alive. And the trade, the actual financial decision with real money at stake, is almost secondary. It's the vehicle, not the destination. Understanding this distinction is critical because when you know you're chasing a feeling, and not just intellectually, but viscerally, emotionally know it, you can start to ask a very different question. Not, is this trade going to be profitable, but am I in a state right now where I can actually make a sound decision? Or am I emotionally activated, and this trade is just the expression of that activation? That question changes the game. Point 4. Why losses feel bigger than they should, and what it's really about. Let's talk about loss, because the way a trader experiences loss, not financially but emotionally, reveals almost everything about what they're really chasing. There's a famous principle from behavioral economics called loss aversion. The research on this goes back decades, and what it consistently shows is that the psychological pain of losing a given amount of money is approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. Lose $100, feel the pain at intensity 10. Gain $100, feel the pleasure at intensity 5. The math is symmetric, the emotional experience is not. Now, in trading, loss aversion gets amplified dramatically, and not just because of the money, but because of everything the money represents. Remember point 1. The market is not just a financial environment, it's an identity environment. And when you lose money in the market, you're not just experiencing a financial loss, you're experiencing a threat to the entire psychological structure you've built around trading. You're not just down on the trade, you're experiencing, maybe I don't have the edge I thought I had. Maybe my read was wrong. Maybe I'm not as skilled as I believed. Maybe that last good month was just luck. And the brain, wired for survival and threat detection, immediately mobilizes around that fear. Not to help you make better decisions, but to help you feel safe again, to restore the psychological status quo. And the fastest way to restore the psychological status quo is to get the money back right now with the next trade. This is why loss aversion doesn't just make traders risk-averse. In a deeply counterintuitive way, it makes them risk-seeking. Because when loss has activated the threat system, the only thing that feels like safety is the possibility of a reversal. The only thing that feels like relief is an open position that could recover everything. And so, the trader who should be walking away, closing the screen, protecting the capital, instead doubles down, adds to a losing position, switches to a lower time frame, hunts for something, anything that feels like it could turn this around, not because the analysis supports it, because the emotional system demands it. There's another layer to this worth understanding. Psychologists who work with traders, and there are a growing number of them, often note that traders with unresolved emotional wounds around themes of failure, shame, and not being enough are significantly more vulnerable to loss aversion's worst effects. Because for these traders, a losing trade doesn't just threaten their trading identity, it confirms a deeper story they've been carrying for years. A story that says, you always fail, you're not good enough, of course this happened. And when a losing trade touches that story, when it reactivates that old wound, the response is no longer rational. It's not even really about the market anymore. It's about everything the loss represents, every previous failure, every time someone doubted you, every moment where you were told, explicitly or implicitly, that you weren't cut out for this. The trade becomes a battlefield for something much older and much more personal than price action. And if you have any sense of recognition reading those words, if something in you is nodding quietly, that recognition itself is worth more than any strategy you could ever learn, because awareness of the wound is the beginning of freedom from it. Point 5. The traders who find consistency, what they actually figured out. We spent a lot of time in the darkness of this topic, and intentionally so, because the light only makes sense against that background. So let me tell you what consistently profitable traders actually figured out. Not the strategies, not the setups, not the indicators, the internal architecture, the psychological operating system that makes everything else work. The first thing they figured out is this. They stopped needing the market to validate them. This sounds simple. It is not simple. It takes time, often painful time, and often some form of significant rupture, a blown account, a devastating drawdown, a moment of clarity in the wreckage, to truly make this shift. But when it happens, something fundamental changes. The trader stops taking bad trades to feel smart, stops revenge trading to feel in control, stops over-leveraging to feel alive, because the need that drove all of those behaviors has been addressed somewhere else in the market, through a practice, through relationships, through therapy, through meditation, through physical training. The point is not how, but that the emotional need found a home somewhere that doesn't involve risking capital. The second thing they figured out is that process is more emotionally satisfying than outcome once you've trained yourself to experience it that way. This is not a naturally occurring belief. Most humans are wired to celebrate outcomes and ignore process. We feel the win of the destination, not the steps along the way. But elite traders and elite performers in almost every other domain have deliberately reversed this wiring. They have made the execution of the process the reward. They have made adherence to the plan the thing that feels good. They have created an internal metric of success that has nothing to do with whether the trade was profitable and everything to do with whether the trade was taken correctly. When you make that shift, when following your rules becomes the emotional win, not the P&L, the game changes completely. Because now you can have a losing trade and still feel good, not because you're suppressing emotion, because you genuinely know that you did the right thing, and you trust that over a large enough sample of right things, the results will follow. The third thing they figured out is that trading has to cost them less emotionally, not by becoming detached, not by becoming a machine, but by reducing the emotional stakes of any individual trade through genuine understanding that one trade means almost nothing, that the edge plays out over hundreds and thousands of trades, that the traders who win are not the ones who find the perfect trade, but the ones who execute their process most consistently over the longest period of time. When any single trade stops being a referendum on who you are, it loses the power to destroy your psychology. And when your psychology stops being at risk, you stop making decisions from fear, ego, and craving. You just trade. And this quality of just trading, clean execution, no drama, no self-narrative attached to every tick, is what trading looks like when someone has genuinely done the internal work. It's quieter than you'd expect, less exciting in a certain way, but far more profitable. The deeper question nobody asks. We're getting close to the end, and I want to leave you with something that I think is more important than any of the 5 points we've covered. The deeper question underneath all of this is not how do I trade better, it's what is this feeling I'm actually looking for? Because the feeling is real. It's not a malfunction, it's not a defect. The drive toward aliveness, toward significance, toward competence, toward the experience of being fully engaged with something real and consequential, that drive is one of the most fundamentally human drives that exists. Trading is not a bad vehicle for that drive. It's actually, in many ways, a brilliant one, demanding, complex, humbling, endlessly educational. The market is one of the few environments in modern life where you genuinely cannot fake competence over the long run. Reality is enforced through your account balance, whether you like it or not. That's rare. That's actually beautiful in its own brutal way. But the traders who find lasting success are the ones who eventually ask, can I get this feeling from the process itself rather than from the outcome? Can I find aliveness in the discipline? Can I find significance in the consistency? Can I feel fully engaged with the work of becoming better rather than the thrill of the win? Because the thrill of the win is not a sustainable emotional diet. It requires increasingly dramatic inputs, bigger positions, larger risks, more intense emotional stakes just to maintain the same level of stimulation. This is the progression of almost every destructive trading story ever told. Not stupidity, not laziness, a tolerance effect. The same dopamine trap that shows up in other high-stimulation environments, wearing the very respectable costume of financial ambition. The process, on the other hand, compounds. The quiet satisfaction of executing a trade properly, of following the rules when it was hard, of sitting on your hands when the itch to trade was almost unbearable, that satisfaction, practiced over time, grows deeper and more stable. It doesn't spike and crash, it builds. And that stability, psychological, emotional, neurological, is the foundation of everything you actually want from trading. What to do with all of this? I want to be direct with you now because this video isn't supposed to just be interesting, it's supposed to be useful. So here is what I'm asking you to do. Before your next trading session, before you even open the charts, take 5 minutes and sit with this question. What am I hoping to feel today? Not what profits are you hoping to make, what feeling are you hoping to have? Write it down if you can. Be honest. If the answer is, I want to feel smart, or I want to feel like a professional, or I want to feel like I'm winning at something, that's not a bad answer. That's an honest one. And an honest answer is the beginning of real work. Then ask yourself, is the market the right place to look for that feeling today? Am I in a psychological state where I can actually execute well, or am I emotionally activated and looking for the market to resolve that activation for me? If the second is even slightly true, even a little bit, consider not trading that day. Not as punishment, not as surrender, as the most sophisticated, most professional thing you could possibly do. Because protecting your capital from your own psychology is the most important skill in trading. Not the most glamorous, not the most exciting to talk about, the most important. The second thing I'm asking you to do is to notice when trading feels most alive. Not most profitable, most alive. And ask yourself what that aliveness is actually about. What need is it meeting? What story is it confirming? This isn't an academic exercise. This is the forensics of your own psychological trading, and every insight you pull from it is worth more than any course, any indicator, any signal service, anything. The third thing, and I know this isn't what most people want to hear, is to consider that the work of becoming a consistently profitable trader is fundamentally a personal development project with trading mechanics attached. It is not a mechanics project with occasional emotional disturbances. The psychology is primary, the strategy is secondary, and until the primary issue is addressed, until you've genuinely grappled with what you're chasing and why, no strategy will be sufficient, because the best strategy in the world, placed in the hands of someone trading to meet an emotional need, will be distorted beyond recognition by the emotional need. You'll take the setups when you're calm and ignore them when you're activated. You'll follow the rules when you're up and abandon them when you're down. You'll be disciplined when it's easy and undisciplined when it matters most. Not because you're weak, because you haven't yet addressed the deeper question. A final thought. There's a kind of trader, and you may have met one or you may be close to becoming one, who has been through enough that the flashy stuff no longer appeals to them, who doesn't need the highlight reels or the Lamborghini screenshots or the promise of six-figure months. This trader has been humbled, has lost enough, has been through enough psychological turbulence that the drama of trading has lost its appeal, and what's replaced it is something quieter and more powerful. A genuine respect for the market, a genuine respect for their own psychology, an understanding that this is a long game, and that long games are won by the most consistent one, the one who is still here in 5 years, in 10 years, who has been refining and learning and growing steadily without needing the market to be a stage for their identity or a drug for their nervous system. This trader executes their plan, manages risk, accepts losses without drama, takes profits without becoming overconfident, sits on their hands when there's nothing to do, and does that without restlessness, without boredom, without the urge to manufacture action. This trader is rare. But this trader is also learnable. This is not a personality type you're born with. It is a psychological orientation that is built, deliberately, through exactly the kind of honest self-examination we've been doing together in this video. You are closer than you think. The fact that you watched this far, the fact that this conversation resonated with you, that it landed somewhere real, tells me something about where you are in your journey. You're past the phase of looking for the holy grail indicator. You're in the phase where you're starting to understand that the real work is internal. That's not a small thing. That's actually one of the most important thresholds in the entire trading journey. And if you're standing on that threshold right now, then what comes next is up to you. Not your broker, not the market, not the strategy you haven't found yet. You. Before you go, if this video gave you something real, if it helped you see your own patterns more clearly or understand your own psychology more honestly, then please do the small thing of subscribing and leaving a comment below. Not because of the numbers, because the comments on these videos are where some of the most honest, most vulnerable, most important conversations about trading psychology happen. And that community of traders who are willing to look inward, to be honest about what drives them, to do the real work, that is something worth building. Tell me in the comments, what feeling are you actually chasing? You might be surprised how many other traders are chasing the exact same thing. Take care of yourself, protect your capital, including the psychological kind. And I'll see you in the next one.